The First Ontario Performing Arts Centre presents Harriet Tubman, When I Cross That Line to Freedom, this Saturday, February 18th. It's an original two-act opera about the life and work of the freedom seeker, performed by the Nathaniel Dett Chorale and led by artistic director Brainerd Blyden-Taylor. Brainerd, we know about Harriet Tubman's connection to Niagara, but I want to, before we get there, talk about your choir's namesake, also a familiar Niagara name.
Yes, indeed. Robert Nathaniel Dett was born in what we now know as Niagara Falls, Ontario in 1882. Back then, he was born in the small sort of Underground Railroad community called Drummondville.
Yeah. And there's a church here, the Nathaniel Dett Chapel, that is still named for him.
That is very true. It has a wonderful history with the Underground Railroad and the Methodist Episcopal, and Dett supposedly attended and played there when he was a child. We know that his mother moved the family to the American side of the border for a while when he was in high school, but he came back and forth, and he graduated from high school in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and kept his relationship with Canada, even though he spent most of his adult life living and teaching in the United States. But when he died in 1943, his body was returned to Niagara Falls, Ontario, because the family plot is there.
Great so I think connection.
His grandmother is buried in the Lundy's Lane Cemetery, and I think the family plot's in the Fairview Cemetery. It's wonderful, strong connection with the area.
Let's talk about this opera. This is an original opera. February 2020, I think, is when you debuted this.
We gave the Canadian premiere in February of 2020. The opera was premiered in the United States through the American Opera Project in 2014. The composer is Dr. Nkiru Okoye, and she was represented by the same booking agent that represented the chorale at the time, who was the person who told me about the opera and said, Brainerd, I think this would be something unique and interesting for the choir to look at. Took a few years, but I'm glad we finally got there.
How many singers will we see on stage on Saturday evening?
There'll be 21 singers, I believe, on Saturday. There'll be there's 10 of them that are soloists that have sort of solo roles, and the rest of the ensemble makes up the chorus. And so we're not staging the opera. It's a concert version of the opera. So the choir will be sort of in two rows, with the soloists in the front row and the chorus behind them. And the soloists will stand up and interact with each other in the audience as their roles require.
And this follows the life story of Harriet Tubman from birth on to her death?
Not entirely onto her death. It's a very personal story. Nkiru did a lot of research into the early life of Harriet Tubman. So, I mean, it begins when Harriet was a young girl, known at the time as Araminta. People called her Minty for short. Her sister was Rachel. Her mother was Aritia. Her father was Ben. And so there's an interaction between the family members and other people working on the plantation. And we see Harriet, Minty at the time, learning how to chop wood and what that means. And then, it progresses to the time when Harriet, feels called to run away. And we have this moment when she says, "My name is Harriet now," not Minty anymore. And we see her interact with the person who becomes her husband. And then she runs away. And the second act begins when she's in Philadelphia, sort of interacting with an abolitionist society, and then the story of going back and forth and her coming back to try and bring other people to to freedom in the North, but particularly across the Canadian border. Yeah.
And it's really gratifying to know that this is going to take place. This story that does take place in St. Catharines is actually being performed in St. Catharines.
In St. Catharines, that's right.
Brainerd, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.